All right, then I'm going to ask you then, is Jordan Love, is he GameStop? Are you just trying to like get out now? Let's sell high. No. Okay. All right. So then let's do a little superflex trade value here, which by the way, shaking your head left to right works awesome for audio. People love that on the podcast. We just watched some crazy playoff performances from Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud. Dave, are all of these guys top 5 dynasty quarterbacks? How do you rank them? Let's take a look at your dynasty rankings first. Let's compare them. Let's see how we do this.
Yes, they are all top 5 dynasty quarterbacks. I'll take it a step further. They are all top 4 dynasty quarterbacks, the 4 players
Okay.
that you just mentioned. I got Jalen Hurts rounding out the top 5 there. But yeah, all these guys that we saw, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, my top 4 dynasty quarterbacks right there.
This is awkward. I have the exact same top 4. We both have Allen 1, Mahomes 2, Jackson 3, Stroud 4. And then I think that's kind of like a little bit of a point of contention because I do think that a lot of people had Jalen Hurts as a top 3, maybe top 2 dynasty quarterback. And there just seems to be so much weird unrest right now in Philly. And kind of this is what happens with Jalen Hurts when Shane Steichen isn't around. And I, so there's a really weird variable that I put here that I want to bring up.
Mhm.
What happens if the NFL bans the tush push? I don't know that it's going to happen, but what happens if they do?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to, but also even if they don't, if Jason Kelsey retires, it's not going to be nearly as effective as it's been in years past. And Nick Bosa kind of joked around that like they put the blueprint out on how to stop the Eagles, and everybody said, "Oh yeah, you sure you can't stop the Eagles?" But every team has kind of followed that blueprint, and the Eagles have not been the same team since. So Jalen Hurts, he's still got the rushing upside. He's still sitting on a big contract, so he's going to be the quarterback for years to come there. I think the fantasy points are going to be there, but I don't think he's got the long-term job security that these other guys do. It's weird, I don't want to sit here and like badmouth Jalen Hurts. That's not what I'm
Right.
trying to do. But I don't know if 3 years from now Jalen Hurts is still going to be starting. He's shown some struggles as a passer, and when they take away those running lanes up the middle, he's not quite as good of a rusher when he gets outside. And Jason Kelsey potentially retiring could take away the tush push that makes him so valuable. So I think that there is a little bit of a shaky floor here with Jalen Hurts that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and it's not that crazy, right? For us to have him at 5. You Lamar Jackson going out here having an MVP season, CJ Stroud breaking rookie records, and you can only assume that kind of longevity sticks around for a guy like Stroud. I mean, and I think it's a testament to how good Jalen Hurts is in terms of fantasy production that you have all this unrest and all this uneasiness and potentially his center retiring, and rule changes and all this, and you're like, yeah, he's probably still just quarterback 5. So it's like it's not a huge change. At the end of this, we have Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. So I kind of want to map this out really quick and we'll move on. Is where do you place the tiers? Okay, so we have these top 7 quarterbacks, right? Like where do you have the tier breaks between these guys?
I have one after Josh Allen. Josh Allen is in a tier of
Oh,
his
by
own.
himself.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Josh Allen is in a tier of his own. Still 27 years old. He's got years of his prime ahead of him. And it's kind of silly that this year we were like, oh, Patrick Mahomes is the QB1 in drafts when Josh Allen has done like nothing but give us elite production for the last 3 years. Last year was the
Has
one year that he wasn't the QB1. But
Yeah, that's what I was
outside of
gonna
that,
say.
he's been the QB1 3 of the last 4 years. I mean, like that is unbelievable, that type of security. So he looks as good as ever too. I mean, he's put some weight on and hasn't slowed down one bit. He is just a wrecking ball when he wants to rush the ball. So it's really tough to put anybody ahead of or even in the same tier as Josh Allen. And then you and I, we got the rest pretty much the same. I've got Patrick Mahomes, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and CJ Stroud all in a tier by themselves. And then the next tier, I have Jalen Hurts in a tier by himself because of everything we talked about. I think that's one of the most complex situations because he has the ceiling to be in a Josh Allen type of system where he can score a lot, but also there's some long-term job security there that worries me a little bit. And then, you know, the tier outside of that is obviously Herbert and Burrow.
And you know what's crazy too is the one season can change everything here, right? Like we can take a look at Joe Burrow next season. If he goes in as an MVP type performance, all of a sudden we're like, yeah, he's probably a top 3, top 4 guy. It's just we see how a single season can change things so much in Dynasty. And that's sort of what we want to talk about today is the players that have been the biggest risers in dynasties, players that are skyrocketing up our specific dynasty rankings. And so we each pick 3 players that we think have just moved up a ton throughout the season and could potentially still keep moving up. Guys that, I mean, Dave, you've talked about this before. You might want to even just buy high. It's not even a buy
Mhm.
low or sell high type thing. It's just guys that you're just like, hey, these guys are really good. They've moved up, and I think we're still willing to invest more. So the first guy I want to take a look at here, Dave, is the guy you nominated, which is Rashee Rice, wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. Before the season, he was the wide receiver 43 roughly in dynasty rankings, and as like that's appropriate for a rookie. He finished in redraft for the fantasy production as the wide receiver 25 in points per game with about 13 and a half points per game. That put him right next to guys like Cooper Kupp, Jaden Reed, Garrett Wilson. So, I mean, some big names there, right? Dave, you've got him as your wide receiver 19. I've got him as my wide receiver 23 in Dynasty. So, this is interesting. I ran a Twitter poll and asked, who would you prefer in Dynasty between these 4 guys? Rashee Rice, Tank Dell, T. Higgins, and Zay Flowers. I know that you know who won the poll, but who would you have picked out of those 4?
I picked Zay Flowers. I did, and I think we're talking about risers here, and I do prefer Zay Flowers of the bunch. But Zay Flowers, we had pretty high expectations for going into this season. He was a first round rookie. We knew he was going to be the perceived wide receiver 1 in Baltimore. So I'm not looking at him so much as a riser. Yeah, he has risen in the ranks, but he was a lot higher to start the season. Rashee Rice, a late second round pick that a lot of people talked about being a raw and unpolished prospect. He's
Right.
the guy who has really, really shot up the ranks, and that's why I want to talk about him. But I do prefer Flowers of this bunch, which I was vastly in the minority of that Twitter poll.
Yeah, Zay Flowers was last. Zay Flowers got 18% of the vote here, which I think is
Crazy.
honestly that's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy. So Rashee Rice gets most of the vote there with 31%, Tank Dell with 30, T. Higgins with 21, Zay Flowers with 18. Like it was not even close. It was so sectioned off between the top 2 and bottom 2 there. So I how would you rank those 4? It kind of sounds like you'd have Flowers at the top. Where would you go after that?
And then Higgins, and then Rice, and then Tank Dell. And they're all
Okay.
pretty close for me. Higgins is obviously a guy who could swing a ton this offseason. I don't want to try to be like super reactive to where a player plays, especially in Dynasty. I try to look long term and bet on the talent more than betting
Yeah.
on the situation. But talking about value does get impacted by perception and situation. And T. Higgins this year, if he signs with Kansas City, I think people are just going to be like, oh, well, T. Higgins, he's a top 5 dynasty wide receiver now. But if T. Higgins signs in Alfredo, I made this joke the other day, Atlanta would be terrible.
Dude,
Maybe
don't do that.
Carolina. I mean, there's like
Don't do that.
some bad spots that T. Higgins could land in, where then all of a sudden he falls outside of the top 15 in dynasty rankings.
I don't hate Carolina. I actually don't hate that one. If you let,
Bryce Young
we'll see.
should
We'll see
Bryce
where
Young
it
can't get
goes.
worse, right? Famous last words, can't get any worse.
Well, Jeff Bell, our lead here for Dynasty content, said that Bryce Young is one of his favorite
Yeah.
layups as a buy low this offseason. So I don't know. We'll see. I actually just think
I
that Higgins ends up
I
back in
I'm
Cincy.
I'm not sure if you saw the study that I just did on number 1 overall picks, but I mean, they're
I did.
extremely safe assets. I mean, we're looking at like a 70% chance of having a 4,000-yard season, a 65% chance of being a 30 touchdown pass or a 30 touchdown in a season passer. And I mean, Bryce Young got off to a slow start here, but I mean, the bust rate for those guys going number 1, those are the guys that we remember. But for every Tim Couch, there are a handful of, really good players as well. So I'm completely with you and Jeff on that. That Bryce Young is a guy that I'd be trying to buy a little bit, going completely off on a tangent from the
No,
topic of this show.
we started Rashee Rice and ended up with Bryce Young. But so Rashee Rice, what I think was so interesting, right, is like I feel like as an industry and just as a society, we projected a lot of our fears and a lot of our trepidation of what happened with Sky Moore the year before. And we brought that over to Rashee Rice because I mean everything in the scouting report was that he needed time to develop Rashee Rice. And so we're like, it's just gonna be another guy. He's gonna have to take time. And it looked like that, right? It looked like that at the beginning of the season, weeks 1 through 9, before the bye week. Rashee Rice is the wide receiver 48, not bad. Around 10 fantasy points per game, not bad. But then after the bye, this is when he really got utilized and he kind of became the trusted target for Patrick Mahomes. He was the wide receiver 15 in points per game, around 17 points per game. So I do want to ask this. I know that everything is really hot for the Chiefs and Rashee Rice had such a good end of the season. How much of this ranking and the poll that we do, right? Like how much of that and the value really just kind of lends itself to a little bit of recency bias, maybe? I feel like as a society, we don't control ourselves very well.
No, I think we got to buy into this when we see a late season breakout for a rookie. I was quick to dismiss it with Brandon Ayuk a few years back, and I was quick to dismiss it with Amon-Ra St. Brown. But this is good. Like if we see a rookie break out at the end of his rookie season, that's usually a promising sign of things to come. This guy wasn't really a full time player until week 14, like super late in the year. Didn't log more than 70% of the team snaps until week 14, but week 12 is when he really saw his usage start to grow a little bit. But even then, he was still a 55 to 60% snap player. But let me just read off some numbers really quickly from week 12 onward. I mean, he was in elite territory, yards per route run basis. The only guys ahead of him: Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nakua, Amari Cooper, Chris Olave, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So elite territory to be in there on a target per route run basis. Tyreek Hill, Jaden Reed, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Pittman, Jalen Waddle, Nico Collins, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown. So that wasn't early in the season on a small sample when he wasn't really running all that much. That was late in the year when he was a full-time player running a ton of routes. He was still maintaining elite production with some of the best of the best. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversation with Rashee Rice this offseason. You know, is he just a product of his environment? Was he just being shoehorned targets because nobody else on the team could catch passes? Or is he a good player? And I think the answer is both. I think that he was in a situation where they were
Both of them.
forced to give him the ball, but he's also a good player. Both things can be true. Rashee Rice, I'd argue, you know, out of that bunch that you talked about, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, let's even throw Jackson Smith and Najigba in there as well as another guy who kind of floats in that tier. I'd argue that Rashee Rice has the highest ceiling of the bunch if everything pans out. Now, his floor is a little bit shaky. Things can change up this offseason. But if you want to bet on the ceiling, Rashee Rice could be that guy that we're looking at, a year or two from now saying, how did we miss this? Of course, this guy's a top 5 wide receiver. Why didn't we buy into him earlier? Rashee Rice could be that good.
Well, and I think it's such like a delicate thing to balance it, right? Like even after the season he's had, I don't believe that Rashee Rice is the most talented of the rookie wide receivers,
Mhm.
but we do have to take into consideration the situation that he's in and the fact that he is playing with Patrick Mahomes and the fact that he is the wide receiver one there and the fact that Travis Kelsey might be gone. So there's just like there's a lot of things. I'm not saying he retires this year, but you know it could happen sooner rather than later. One of the things that I wanted to take a look at here, though, was free agency, because I know that the Chiefs look like they're going to be a player in free agency. And I think it's safe to say, or I'm assuming here, maybe I'm assuming too much, Mike Evans, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins probably all stay in their teams, right? Maybe T. Higgins is a guy that could be an option for Kansas City. But let's say they sign someone like a T. Higgins, Calvin Ridley, Marquise Brown. Twitter overwhelmingly said, I do not care. I do not care. The only one that maybe bothers them is T. Higgins, but the fantasy world does not care if Kansas City signs another wide receiver. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I said, you know, it's all very different situations, all of these receivers. I think the best case scenarios for Rice would be if they brought in a Hollywood Brown or if they brought in a Calvin Ridley, a guy who could stretch the field, basically an MVS that could actually catch the ball. All of a sudden, that adds something to the offense that the Chiefs have been missing, and I think that that opens up the underneath stuff for Rashee Rice. We haven't seen him, you know, running a lot of 9 routes, running a lot of post routes, getting deep downfield. He's kind of staying, you know, 10 to 15 yards off the line of scrimmage. He's getting bubble screens. He's getting jet sweeps. They're trying to manufacture touches to get the ball in his hands. So if they have a legitimate deep threat, a guy like Calvin Ridley or a guy like Hollywood Brown, all that does is open up the underneath stuff and makes it even better for Rashee Rice. Now, some of the other guys that you mentioned, T. Higgins would worry me a little bit. T. Higgins is obviously a downfield threat, but he could win on those short to intermediate routes as well. I think the worst case scenario would actually be Michael Pittman, because Michael Pittman is another guy who runs kind of those shorter A dot routes. He's not a big time field stretcher. He'd work in a lot of the same parts of the field as Rashee Rice. And we also know that he has an ability to draw a ton of targets. So I think Michael Pittman would probably be worst case scenario. I would love it for Rashee Rice's value if they brought in either Hollywood Brown or Calvin Ridley, though.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of people feel, that just bringing in another complimentary receiver will really open things up for him. But Rashee Rice, man, it's just the value has gone way, way up. Dave, I think we both really like him, and being attached to Patrick Mahomes, that's just good. That's just good for dynasty. Next receiver on here, attached to another good quarterback. I put up Nico Collins, wide receiver for the Houston Texans, and I do see here in our rankings, I'm a bit higher on Nico than you are. Before the season, the value for Nico Collins, it was actually crazy low. If you bought in before, it was around wide receiver 55. I think a lot of people had just kind of given up and said, well, Texans won't be very good. CJ Stroud's going to take time. Obviously, that all changes when you have a record setting rookie quarterback. He finished as the wide receiver 14 in fantasy, 16 points per game. I've got him as my wide receiver 14, and I've got him in a tier. I call it my tier 4, and we'll go over that in just a little bit. But Dave, you've got him as your wide receiver 20 in Dynasty. I assume that's still ahead of Tank Dell, right? In terms of the Houston wide receivers?
Exactly one spot ahead, and we'll discuss
Okay.
this a little bit. I've got them at 20 and 21. I mean, literally back to back.
Okay. So, I mean, I do have a question here, but I feel like the question's already kind of answered based on your ranking. But I'm sitting here going through my rankings and trying to figure out where to put Nico Collins in Dynasty. And I actually started to convince myself that I don't think it's that crazy to maybe even move Nico Collins up to a top 12 wide receiver. I think there's just excuses that you can move a bunch of these guys down. Like Jalen Waddle for me right now is wide receiver 10, but I think you can also make an excuse that he could be like wide receiver 15.
Mhm.
Right? Like I think that so many of these guys become interchangeable, and that's why it's important to do the tiers. We do tiers here. And so I've got Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, Nico Collins, kind of all within that same tier. Drake London, Michael Pittman, or a couple of other guys. I think a lot of these guys have different warts that come with them. Nico Collins kind of seems to be one of those few guys that don't have many warts. I mean, Jalen Waddle's second fiddle to Tyreek, and we don't really know what kind of version of Tua we're getting. Devontae Smith feels like same story as Waddle. DJ Moore could be starting over with a new rookie quarterback. Drake London, we have no idea who their quarterback or coach is. Michael Pittman, we don't know how that's going to be with Anthony Richardson, DK Metcalf. Yeah, there's a whole bunch going on in Seattle. So Nico, like I've talked myself into it where I'm like, I think he could actually be top 12. Where do you sit on that?
I don't quite have him inside my top 12. First of all, I want to say anybody who like follows me on Twitter, reads my articles, has listened to this show or any other shows that I've done in the past, I have long been a Nico Collins tout. I really, really like Nico Collins, but if you could flip him for Jalen Waddle or Devonta Smith or a Brandon Ayuk, I think I'm probably doing that at this point. And again, I really do like Nico Collins. You know, this year 3 breakout is something that we used to always see with wide receivers and have kind of written off as a thing of the past. And we want immediate production from these rookies. And when they don't produce immediately, we fade them down into the wide receiver 55 range, like we did with Nico Collins. But I think for me, what it comes down to is wanting to see how he and Tank Dell can coexist, and that's kind of why I copped out drafting or ranking these guys back to back in my dynasty rankings because Tank Dell was a rookie, and we saw him kind of slowly start to ramp up his workload a little bit this season, and it was kind of week 9 to 12 that we saw Tank Dell take over, and during that stretch. Luckily, Nico Collins was still able to maintain some production because the team was scoring a ton. They were in 4 straight shootouts, but there was a 4 game stretch before Tank Dell got injured where he led Nico Collins in targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns, first reads, target share, air yard share, just about every metric you want to look at. It looked like Tank Dell was taking over. So I think that's just the little bit of a fear that I have here is that Nico Collins is very good, but that it could be a 1A, 1B type of situation where Nico Collins is the 1B behind Tank Dell.
So that's interesting. And I'm glad that you brought this up because I did find it interesting. And that was one of my main worries. And then when I started to look into it, I looked at the splits with and without Tank Dell for Nico Collins. And with Tank Dell, Nico Collins was actually better. He averaged just over 17 and a half fantasy points per game. And then without Tank Dell, all of the coverage goes to him, still averaged 15 fantasy points per game. It was actually really similar to like a Brandon Ayuk, where he'd have these huge blow up games of 195 yards, multiple touchdown games, just crazy stuff. And I think where I see the value is he's attached to CJ Stroud. I know he's going to be attached to CJ Stroud forever. And I I think that there's a lot of the things that you're saying about Nico Collins, right? Being potentially the second guy on the team. That's stuff that we already know about guys like Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. And I think the quarterback situation's better. And these are guys that a lot of us have no problem ranking in the top 12. And I think the argument just kind of comes down to those guys are probably a little bit more talented than Nico, but I don't know that it's that far fetched to have him there. So,
So here's the one other thing I'll say is Nico Collins,
yeah,
he only has 1 year left on his contract with Houston, and then he becomes a free agent after next season. And Nico Collins has been great with CJ Stroud. We know that. He's averaging 17.7 points per game with Nico Collins, but he's played 24 other career games with quarterbacks besides Nico Collins. And in those
mhm.
games, he's averaged just 7.8 points per game. So if Nico Collins signs a contract, and we know that he's going to be tied to CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans for the next 3, 4, 5 years, I think then I'd be willing to move him up a little bit. But I do have a slight fear that Nico Collins is out of Houston after this year. And we've seen before the CJ Stroud era that Nico Collins was just kind of a boomer bust wide receiver three.
I like this. We're doing like a very nice fencing back and forth. You can tell that we're not doing shows 5 days a week because we're not yelling at each other quite so much, but we're just like, oh, yeah, well, did you know
Well, it's
this?
tough for me to say. I don't want to say anything poorly about Nico Collins because
Right,
I
right,
love
right.
Nico Collins. Like I've been telling you to go out and buy this guy for years and years and years. But there also reaches a certain point where a guy that we're buying, his value gets so high that I'm saying maybe now is the time to sell. And I think that if people are starting to value Nico Collins as a top 12 dynasty wide receiver, I think I'd prefer, the exact guys that I mentioned: Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, Brandon Ayuk. If you can flip Nico Collins for one of those guys, I think they are going to have a little bit more standalone value. They aren't quite as situational or quarterback dependent as a guy like Nico Collins is.
Last thing I'll say this about your concern of potentially Nico Collins going somewhere in free agency. We really haven't seen a lot of these number ones hit free agency and get paid somewhere else. They usually get tagged by their team and stick around, or they get the big deal. I mean, the biggest wide receiver we saw maybe in free agency this past year was Jacoby Myers and DeAndre Hopkins. Year before that, Christian Kirk. Year before that, I think the one time we saw this was Kenny Galladay, where someone paid up big for a receiver. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's a terrible example, but like that's about it. Usually, these receivers that change teams are guys that get traded for. So
Mhm.
I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I think the Texans want to keep that band together. Last thing, actually, before we move on here, when it comes to these wide receivers, how much value do you place on the potential longevity with their quarterback? So, like seeing, okay, Nico Collins is young, CJ Stroud is young, they could be together for 5 more years. I think that's where a lot of people put the value with guys like Higgins and Chase with Burrow. Is that something that you really weigh heavily when doing these kind of rankings and figuring out dynasty values?
Not especially. When I do dynasty rankings, I try to rank strictly on talent because situations change so quickly. CJ Stroud could get injured. Nico Collins could walk in free agency after this year. There's so many things. We always think that we can read the tea leaves and predict how the NFL is going to shake out, but we're terrible at doing it. So I try to rank as best as I can strictly on talent. But then inside those tiers, the situation is usually the tiebreaker for me inside the tiers.
Okay, I'm glad you said that the situation is a tiebreaker. I was about to say like that's how you get Terry McLaurin, Dave. You don't want to
Right.
you don't want to get McLaurin. All right, next guy we have on here, Rachaad White, running back for the Tampa Bay Bucks. Before the season, he was just outside of the top 20 running backs, and then he finished as the running back 9 in points per game this year. A lot of what was volume based for him. He got a ton of work with Tampa, and I think that's what a lot of people were hoping for. I still got him as my running back 12. Dave, you're a little bit higher, running back 9 in Dynasty. I'd say this. I'd say that the Bucks competition window, one, the Bucks are a lot better than we thought they were going to be. And I think they're going to see that there's a competition window now with Mike Evans being a little bit older. A
Mhm.
lot of their defensive pieces are a little bit older, like at the linebacker spot. Um, well, let's ask this question first. Do you think that the Bucks run it back with Baker Mayfield in 2024?
Yes.
I mean,
I
they
mean,
have
just
to, right?
simple, yeah. Yeah, they won
They
a
have
playoff
to.
game with Baker Mayfield. He's looked great. He had a few down games, but overall, you look at the whole body of work from 2023. He was a very good quarterback this year.
Okay, so I know you're big on the efficiency metrics, right? And rushing yards over expectation. I think that was one of the things that you and I both looked at the early on in the year. That Rachaad White was not doing very good there, and everything was really volume based. He
Yeah.
seemed to get a little bit better as the season went on, but how much of the value for Rachaad White in Dynasty is kind of volume based versus talent? Because I know you just mentioned you like to look at how talented is the player. It kind of seems like he changed your mind throughout the season.
Yeah, and I think he is a talented player. I mean, third round pick for a rookie is that's kind of similar to like a second round pick for a wide receiver I'm sorry, third round pick for a running back, with the way that they've been getting depressed in drafts lately. So a third round pick is a decent draft capital invested in a running back, and he's got the prototypical size and the measurables and all that. You know, he can be a 3 down back. Alfredo, I think we talked about it on the show in the offseason when he DM'd us on the Football Guys Twitter account saying that he had put on weight and he was 220
That's
pounds now.
right. And he was 6 foot now as
Yeah,
well.
he
He
said that
grew.
he said that he was 6 foot and said that he was 220 pounds and ready for a 3 down role.
I love
Um,
that. Being 24 years old and hitting a growth spurt, man. You love to
yeah,
see
how
it.
about it? And you know, coming into the league, we knew that he was going to be a good pass catcher. But he did improve his running a little bit. That being said, you know, we talked about the early season numbers and efficiency metrics. Those were still kind of bad in the second half of the season as a rusher. You know, negative rushing yards over expectation, negative EPA per play. All in all, like he wasn't great as a rusher, but he's such a threat as a receiver that I think it still makes him valuable. I'm going to make a really boring comp here, but I think it's a lot like Leonard Fournette. You looked at Leonard Fournette during his time in Tampa Bay. He wasn't a wildly efficient runner, but he was a good pass blocker, and that pass blocking kept him on the field. He ran a ton of routes, and then when he would run the ball, it was enough. You know, he could score touchdowns here and there on the ground, but most of his value came through the air. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see with Rachaad White. He's such a good pass catcher and such a good pass blocker that he's going to be on the field all the time. He's going to pull a lot of targets, and any rushing production that you get is just kind of the cherry on top. But you're plugging this guy into your lineup because of his pass catching abilities.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up the pass catching abilities because we saw like that was kind of the anchor for him in terms of fantasy value. And that did change a little bit in terms of the Bucks game plan, right? In 2022, they were number one in pass rate. Tom Brady's there. You're passing all the time. Defense wasn't very good. Defense a little bit better this past year. Baker Mayfield, you're probably not trusting him to throw as much. He ends up having a really good season. They're still 14th in pass rate, so upper half of the league, right? They still seem to lean heavily towards pass over run, which is good for White, especially PPR formats. That's what he's good at, right?
Mhm.
I think what I'm gonna say here and why like I can't get Rachaad White into that top 10. And I sat there doing the rankings and thought like I could probably even just bump him down to like RB 14 or 15 because everything feels so volume based. Is if I'm the general manager of the Buccaneers and I look at our team and say, okay, we have to compete right now, and we were last in rushing, and Rachaad White was just not efficient in running the ball. I think I'm going out and I'm getting a running back. I mean, the Bucks have the eighth most cap space right now. I know they have to sign Mayfield. They're probably going to tag or sign Evans and give him some sort of a Hall of Famer deal, right? But there's some names out there, Dave, and I kind of want to go back and forth with you on this and see like how does this change the value for Rachaad White. So I'm going to start a bit bigger here, okay? Josh Jacobs, if he signs the Bucks, is it over for Rachaad White?
Yeah. Yeah. That would be
Yeah.
worst case scenario.
Okay, I mean, it's not likely. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Let's say Derrick Henry. He says, "I want to compete for a ring. This gives me a shot."
Yeah, you know, that would impact him a little bit, but again, Derrick Henry isn't a notable pass catcher. Rachaad White's going to maintain a stranglehold on the passing down work. He'll give up the goal line work, and that negatively impacts him. But I still think you're looking at Rachaad White, even if Derrick Henry's there, is kind of a high end RB2.
Okay, so you're talking high end RB2 there. So I think these next guys, I can just kind of throw out all their names and be like, what happens if they sign this type of running back? So I think this is more likely, by the way. Ezekiel Elliott, Deonta Foreman, AJ Dillon, Zach Moss, one of these guys who doesn't necessarily take over the backfield, but he's just annoying enough that Rachaad White loses his 20 touches a game, and it's probably closer to like 15 or 14 touches per game, and maybe loses some of those goal line touches. Where would that push him in terms of dynasty ranking for you?
I'm still probably drafting him dynasty. You know, he probably falls down a few spots, but I'm still looking at him as a top 10 redraft guy next year. I mean, really, what it comes down to with Rachaad White, he's in this big tier of running backs that I have. It's Rachaad White, Kenneth Walker, Saquon Barkley, Isaiah Pacheco, Josh Jacobs, James Cook. I have them all in a tier together. And what I like about Rachaad White is his short term value. I think that some of those other guys might be more productive. You know, 3 to 5 years from now. But I think that if you're looking for immediate production on a contending team, Rachaad White's a guy that's probably going to be giving us top 5 numbers next season, assuming his situation doesn't change too much. So that's really what I'm looking at. And that's why he's kind of sitting atop that tier right now, is because I think the short term value and the short term production you're going to get from Rachaad White is going to be higher than all those other guys.
You talked about flipping Nico Collins for a similar player in a tier that's just a little bit better. Would you flip Rachaad White for let's say a Saquon Barkley, or do you even not see him as a better dynasty asset?
I don't. I prefer Saquon
Wow.
Barkley's getting up
Okay.
there in age a little bit. I don't know what
Wow.
his situation is going to look like. Those injuries have just been piling up. Saquon just isn't the same player he was when he was drafted. I mean, it's been what, 6 years in the league now. 6 years in the NFL is a lot of miles on a running back's body. So yeah, in a vacuum, and whether I'm rebuilding or contending, I'd prefer Rachaad White over Saquon Barkley.
Interesting. I think I go the other way. I,
Yeah.
I I think I think Saquon ends up back there. I just wanted to bring that up. All right, next guy we got on here, Jordan Love, quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. Before the season, Dynasty, community had him around quarterback 18. Since then, we've seen him take a nice jump up. It was a little rocky. He had a nice, really hot start, went back down, then finally finished back up. And we saw the Packers were much better than we thought. Good young team. He finished quarterback 7 in fantasy this past year. I've got him as my quarterback 11, and I've got him in my tier number 4. We'll kind of go over that tier and who's there, and I'm gonna do a little bit like who you rather. But Dave, you got him at quarterback 13. You've got him just outside of that dynasty QB1 threshold. So, I mean, first thing I want to know is why. Bad
um,
timing. Bad timing. Sorry, I didn't
yeah,
see. I
sorry,
didn't
you
see you
got
had to
me
cough.
right as I was coughing. Yeah, looking, and again, we kind of talk about tier-based rankings here. For me, 11, 12, and 13 are Dak Prescott, Justin Fields, and Jordan Love. So I'm looking at all those guys pretty similarly here, and things could really change drastically this offseason. I think the one thing I'm waiting on, and I expect it to happen, and because I expect it to happen, I should probably bump Jordan Love up. I think he gets a mega extension this offseason. I think they're going to give him, a 5-year, $250 million contract, something like that. And as soon as he inks that deal, then we're probably moving him inside our top 10. I just want to wait for it to actually happen before I can take that lunge in my rankings. But I think that he's good. And I think that there might even be a little bit of a buy window right now because of that terrible, terrible interception that ended their season. And people are going to say, oh, Jordan Love, poor decision maker. I'm already seeing people, comping that throw to what he did in college. But I think Jordan Love's good. I think he's going to get a long term contract. Honestly, the way I'm looking at it right now, I should probably put him ahead of Fields. So yeah, I'll move him ahead of Fields right now. I've got him as my QB 12.
Okay, so wow, you have Fields a little bit lower than I would have thought. So I was going to ask, do like the little would you rather here. So sounds like you're moving him above Fields, so that's
Hmm.
fine. Uh, from what I heard you say, you've got Trevor Lawrence ahead of him, right?
Yep. Yep.
You got Dak Prescott ahead of him,
Yep. Up. Yep. Yep. And
Kyler
then
Murray.
Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, and then the big seven we opened up the show with.
Okay, and so then I can take it. That means you slot Jordan Love ahead of Tua Tagovailoa and Brock Purdy, right?
And Jared Goff and Deshaun Watson and
Yep.
Justin Fields. Yep, yep.
Okay,
And it's
I think
really
that
it's really
I think
tough to
that's fair.
move Love ahead of those guys. But yeah, right now, I prefer Love over Tua and the other guys we mentioned.
Love is always the answer, Dave. I got him a little bit higher though. I do have him a little bit higher. I have him ahead of
Oh,
Trevor
ahead of
Lawrence.
Dak, ahead of
I do
Trevor
have
Lawrence.
I do
Ooh,
have him. I have him ahead of Dak. I have him ahead of Trevor Lawrence.
all right.
I think we've made a lot of excuses for Trevor Lawrence. I still believe in him. Don't get me wrong. I think you can believe in both of these guys, and I just think that like we're scratching the surface here with Jordan Love, and I think that Trevor Lawrence. You kind of hate that you're seeing the like such a big up and down with Trevor Lawrence. We haven't quite seen him really break out and be the guy that we want, and
Mhm.
it seemed like this was supposed to be that year. Dak, I think we saw his very best this past season. I don't know that we see that again. I oddly enough have Justin Fields a bit higher because I think he's going to end up in a situation that's probably going to be better for him. I've got Kyler Murray ahead of him as well. And then I have Tua and Brock a little bit lower. So, all right. So then let's do this. We kind of did like where we put them in terms of the quarterbacks, the rankings. But all right, then I'm going to ask you then, is Jordan Love, is he GameStop? Are you just trying to like get out now? Let's sell high. No. Okay. All right. So then let's do a little Superflex trade value here, which by the way, shaking your head left to right works awesome for audio. People love that on the podcast. So let's do a little bit of this then. Like, right? Do you, I know we haven't done rookies yet. We haven't started talking about the upcoming rookie class, but would you rather have Jordan Love or maybe let's say in a single quarterback draft, or excuse me, super flex draft pick 106? Let's call that Brock Bowers.
Give me Jordan Love over Brock Bowers.
Okay, let's go pick 105 and let's just insert Jaden Daniels, the quarterback from LSU, a Heisman winner. Jaden Daniels or Jordan Love?
So much of this is going to come down to where Jaden Daniels gets drafted. If he
Right.
does end up going like top 3 and he's going to be a week 1 starter, it's going to be tough. But I think right now I'd probably prefer Jordan Love. And again, if once Jordan Love signs that extension, he's going to have just as much job security as a guy, if not more job security than a guy like Jaden Daniels. So yeah, give me Jordan Love over the 104.
Okay, then pick 104. Let's call it Malik Neighbors, the wide receiver from LSU.
I'm going to go Jordan Love.
Okay, so then last thing here before we kind of move
I
on
will take
with
Marvin Harrison Jr. over Jordan Love.
no, yeah, of course. So you mentioned if Green Bay gives him the mega extension, right? Is there anything that stops him from doing that? It kind of seems like he's in the can't fail situation. He's got all
Mhm.
these good young players around him. They've saved a ton of money by drafting really well over the years. They've got a solid defense. I mean, what would make them not pay Jordan Love right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to. It would be kind
Can
of
we just
foolish for them to try to like, oh, let's draft a quarterback and see what that guy can be. I think Jordan Love has deserved that extension, and
okay?
I joked around about it. Remember the preseason? I did that like, oh no, they did it again, and
Yeah,
yeah, I think they actually did do it again. I mean, Jordan Love looks like I can't say he's going to be a Hall of Famer. That's not what I'm trying to imply
no.
here, but I think he's going to be a long term above average starter. This was a rebuilding year for the Packers, and they won a playoff game, and then they were this close. They were a missed field goal away from beating San Francisco on the road. It's a good team, good quarterback. Um, yeah, Jordan Love is just good. That's all I got. He's a good football
Uh,
player in a good situation with a good coach and good teammates. It wheels up for Jordan Love.
you know what? I think as we've been talking here, I think I'm willing to move Kyler Murray up to my quarterback 9, move Justin Fields down, and probably put Jordan Love in at quarterback 10. I'm willing to just skip a chapter here because I think that the extension is coming. I don't think there's anything that's stopping it there. Like we might as well. That's a big thing in dynasty. Is like be ahead of the trend before it happens. So
And I think if he
I'll
does that, if
I'll go
Jordan
there.
Love gets that contract, yeah, then I'm probably putting him ahead of Dak Prescott.
All right. Let's get to our next guy here. Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. Davis was your nomination. Before the season, it's not like it was a crazy huge jump, but before the season, he was around wide receiver 22. A lot of people saying this is going to be the year. This is going to be the year. He's going to break out. And some people kind of kept their reservations. He's a low end dynasty wide receiver 2. Finishes as the wide receiver 12 in terms of points per game. I've got him ranked as my dynasty wide receiver 12. I think he's right in that perfect tier with a bunch of guys that are valued pretty similarly. And then Dave, you got him as your wide receiver 10. So when I talk about this tier, at least for my rankings, I've got it Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk. How would you kind of reorder that tier, or do you kind of see them all as equal, and you're kind of cool with whoever?
Yeah, I've got Michael Pittman in that tier as well. And then I just happen to
He
have Brandon
scares me.
Ayuk. Yeah,
Pittman
I
scares me
mean,
with Richardson.
yeah, he does, but he's also I don't know if he's going to get tagged this year or what it is.
Yep.
But yeah, I think Michael Pittman, kind of trying to project forward, and he's at the very bottom of that tier for me. But Pittman is in that tier as well. But Ayuk sits at the top, and again, you said you want to try to get ahead of the curve and things like that. And I think with Brandon Ayuk right now, we're seeing him not elite production, but we're seeing him, pretty much giving us wide receiver 1 production, and he's doing that on a team with Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey. So this
Yep.
is a guy I'm trying to buy now, and this is why I'm okay putting him inside my top 10 already. He's still just 25 years old. He's got years where he can get even better than he already is. Former first round pick. We saw him explode at the end of his rookie season. And then he had that year 2, if you remember, where he was kind of in Shanahan's doghouse. Remember, like we were
Yep.
so excited about Brandon Ayuk going into year 2. And then week 1, he's not even on the field. And we're like, what is going on? And I think that bad taste is still in a lot of people's mouths. Year 3, he kind of put it together, had his first 1,000-yard season, and then just exploded this year. 1,342 yards, 7 touchdowns. And he did that while almost being a part-time player. Like he's not a guy who's on the field all the time. 17.9 yards per reception on 75 catches is ludicrous. Only George Pickens had more yards per reception, and Brandon Ayuk did it on much more, or many more catches than
Right.
George Pickens did. Could not spit that out. But but overall, man, he's just a really good player. 9th in the league in yards per game, 2nd in yards per target, 3rd in yards per route run, and he did this while being 53rd in routes. So, like I said, he wasn't on the field all that much. He wasn't running a ton of routes, but when he was on the field, he was dominant. So I might be crazy with this take here, but I'm looking at him as a top 10 guy because I think that if he does end up hitting free agency after next season and could sign with a team we could see that type of AJ Brown type of breakout that he had in Philly, or a DJ Moore breakout that he had in Chicago this year. But I think Ayuk is even better than those guys. I think he could be in that Jefferson, Lamb, Chase production where he's given us 20 plus points per game in a better situation. He is so good. And right now he's just on a team where he is fighting for target volume. He's fighting for routes. Like, he can't even get on the field and he's still giving us elite production. I think Brandon Ayuk is just a wildly talented player.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I tend to agree with you. I do think that I still think Debo takes a bit of the work away, but and I think that's where kind of like a little bit of the negative value from maybe dynasty managers comes in, or where it was earlier in the season, why people had that trepidation and had him at wide receiver 22. It's okay, is Brock Purdy the real thing, right? There was a little bit of uneasiness at quarterback. There's George Kittle there, there's Debo Samuel, and there was a lot of games there where it was like, well, Debo really looks like the wide receiver one here, and then it'd be back over. No, Brandon Ayuk, man, we can't forget about how good he is, and there was a little bit of volatility that we saw.
Mhm.
Ayuk had 4 top 12 finishes, 8 top 24 finishes, and then 7 finishes outside the top 29, where he was wide receiver 30 or worse. And I almost wonder, because that seems kind of like the perfect guy to have in Dynasty, where you're typically going to be starting 3 wide receivers, a couple flexes. You do tend to have deeper rosters, deeper benches, and a more volatile player seems perfectly fine. So, Dave, you have him as the wide receiver 10 in Dynasty, right? I don't think there's very many people that have him there. So, does that make Brandon Ayuk kind of the perfect wide receiver to buy right now? Debo's getting older. George Kittle's getting older. There's a little bit of uneasiness with Brock Purdy. So is he the perfect wide receiver to buy?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether he stays in San Francisco, that's kind of would be the worst case scenario, as crazy as it sounds. But like you said, all these other guys are getting older, so he's just going to see his role grow. But then also looking at him potentially leaving and ending up in a better situation 2 years from now. Yeah, I think you should absolutely be going out and trying to buy Brandon Ayuk. He's a good young football player, which is what you want to see. And yeah, I don't know. I think having him inside the top 10 is kind of where he should be. I think you said you got him at wide receiver 12, right? Yeah, so we're
Yeah.
not like crazy far off on Brandon Ayuk. He's just a very, very, very talented player, and I think he hasn't even begun to scratch the surface of what he can do.
All right. So let's do a little quick would you rather in single quarterback rookie drafts, because this is what people love to do, is trade their picks for players. So 105, that kind of feels like a no brainer. You're trading the 105 for Brandon Ayuk all day, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. 104. Let's call it Roma Dunze, the wide receiver from Washington. You're trading that for Brandon Ayuk.
I think I'd take Ayuk there. Yeah.
Yep. 103. Brock Bowers, tight end from Georgia.
This is where it gets pretty tough, but I think I'd still take Ayuk. And
Okay.
this
And
is
then
single quarterback, of course, right?
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
single
Yeah.
quarterback. And then here's, I think, the litmus test right now is 102. Malik Neighbors, the wide receiver from LSU. I think this is where it gets a little bit more dicey.
Yeah, I think I'm still gonna go with Ayuk here.
Wow.
I'd take
Okay.
a guy who has already shown proven NFL success over, like, if everything works out for a dude. It's like a best case scenario. Yeah, he could be Brandon Ayuk, but you've already got Brandon Ayuk. So I don't
It
know,
could even be a boat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So I mean, lesson learned here. If you're in a dynasty league with Dave, just go trade him Brandon Ayuk, and you'll get whatever you want back in return.
I've
I
already probably got him on my team, so good luck.
All right, last guy here. We're running way behind. But last guy here, Trey McBride, tight end for the Arizona Cardinals. This one was just a pleasure to watch throughout the year. Love Trey McBride coming into the league, and to see him just kind of flourish this offseason or this season was awesome. Before the season, he was ranked in Dynasty around tight end 21. That's where a lot of people had him valued. He finished as a tight end 9 in fantasy points per game. That didn't quite tell the story of his season, and we'll get
Right.
more into that in just a little bit. I've got him ranked as my dynasty tight end 2. Dave, you've got him as your dynasty tight end 1. I think it's just fair to say we both have he and Sam Laporta in that top tier. And at this point, they're kind of interchangeable. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And, and
Yeah,
and realistically, I mean, Kincaid is probably in that tier as well. Like,
I
are
think
we
he's
just
close.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
yeah.
think he's right there.
I've actually, you know what? Yeah, after last night's game where Stephon Diggs just doesn't look like he really has it
Mhm.
anymore. Yeah, I think that's very realistic. So that's
Yeah.
not far off of putting Dalton Kincaid probably at tight end 3 amongst these guys. It's interesting, Dave, because we knew that Kyler Murray loved the tight end, and we kind of see Zach Ertz who gets injured, and then that's it. His time there in Arizona is done. Weeks
Now
1
he's a
through
Lion.
9. Yeah, that's what a signing. All right. We'll see how that goes. That should be interesting. I hope he gets a ring. That'd be cool. We know Kyler Murray loves a tight end. Weeks
Mhm,
1 through 9, Trey McBride without Kyler Murray and with Zach Ertz involved in some form or fashion in some weeks. McBride was a tight end 23, 7 points per game in fantasy. Then you get to with Kyler Murray, weeks 10 through 17, he's the tight end 2 in points per game ahead of Sam Laporta, 15.2 fantasy points per game in PPR. And then let's just take this a step further, Dave. Let's throw all the numbers out there for people that love numbers. The 17 game pace. So sorry, in his final 10 games that Trey McBride had,
mhm,
if you take that and turn that into a 17 game pace, it would be 112 receptions for over 1,100 yards. We're
mm,
talking about a
mm, mm, mm.
phenomenal performance. So that I there is a real argument there that yeah, he's the tight end one. And I think the more you dig into this, I don't know how much that really changes in the offseason. I mean, there's some potential scenarios that could happen. And I want to ask you, I'm going to give you a scenario. You tell me how you feel about it in terms of
Before
Trey
that,
McBride's value. Yeah.
real quickly, you talked about the 17 game pace from week 10 onward. Let me just throw some other numbers to you. Over that
Yeah.
time, he was top 3 in targets, top 3 in receptions, top 3 in receiving yards. He was 5th in routes run. So he was doing this again, not even seeing like a full package like a lot of other tight ends were. He was tied with David Njoku for the lead in targets per route run, and he was 4th in air yard share among tight ends. So, I mean, top 5 across the board, and like every single efficiency and usage metric we want to see for a tight end. And yeah, we can talk about these hypotheticals now. I just wanted to add a little bit of context. He's just doing everything you want to see from a tight end. He's drawing targets, he's getting yards, he's doing it all.
The listeners that had their spreadsheets open were just waiting. They were like, "Come on, Dave, say it, say it." They loved it. So okay, let's go through these scenarios here. At the see how you feel about it. Does it help or hurt Trey McBride? Do you keep him as tight end one in dynasty? So let's go. First scenario here: the Cardinals stay at pick 4 in the NFL draft, and they draft Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors at pick 4. Does this help, hurt? Is it kind of a wash? How do you feel about
Well, that would suck. That would really not be cool. I wouldn't be too happy about that. But also, I mean, is it any worse than like Sam Laporta sharing a field with Amon St.
right?
Brown? I feel like we didn't even see Kyler Murray back to 100% Kyler Murray this year. We're going to see that next year where he's going to be better. He's going to have another year of chemistry with Trey McBride. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you add a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., who's probably going to gobble up 150 targets, it's not great for Trey McBride, but I think McBride is still going to produce.
All right. This is a full DEF CON. What's the worst DEF CON? I don't even know the levels of that. Do you know?
No, I
Let's
do
just
not.
make it up. Let's just make it up. DEF CON 1000. Worst case scenario here. Cardinals trade away Kyler Murray, draft Jaden Daniels, the quarterback out of LSU at pick 4.
Mm, yeah, I wouldn't like that too much. Sorry, I
Does
was
he
looking up the DEF CONs
does
there.
does he
DEF CON 2 is the worst, apparently, from
Wait,
what I saw.
what? What a
Yeah,
stupid ranking system. Why is DEF CON 2 the worst? What's DEF
I don't
CON
know. Or
1?
actually, I guess DEF CON 1 is like actual nuclear war has happened, but DEF CON 2 is like the
So DEF CON
like
1000 is like nothing. That's like
yeah,
someone dropped a teddy bear.
like DEF CON 5 is just chilling, like just waiting, like totally United States is at peace, no immediate threat to national security. It's
Got
as
it.
you get in lower numbers, the panic levels go up. Threat level midnight.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yes.
So sorry, Jaden Daniels to the
Yeah,
Cardinals.
that's what we were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, DEFCON 1. That's terrible.
DEF CON
Just
1.
completely yeah. We wanna see Trey McBride linked to Kyler Murray, and again, I think Trey McBride is a good player in his own right. Like, I think that he's going to be fine wherever he plays, but the best case scenario for him is that he is tied with Kyler Murray for the foreseeable future. We gotta remember he was a first round pick, so they're probably going to exercise that fifth-year option, which means that he's got 3 more years tied to Kyler Murray in Arizona. That's what we want to see.
So we mentioned these guys earlier, and I kind of just want to bring this up again. Let's say the Cardinals re-sign Marquise Brown, or they sign Calvin Ridley as the wide receiver there. How do you feel in either of those situations?
Yeah. Um, Kind of very similar to Rashee Rice. Trey McBride isn't like a super downfield threat. He's kind of a low A dot guy, gets a lot of his routes at like the 5 to 10 yards off the line of scrimmage area of the field. So a guy like Marquise Brown, if he stays there, or if they bring in a guy like Calvin Ridley, that's just going to stretch the field. I think that just works even better for Trey McBride.
Yeah, I think for pretty much all of these situations, I'm fine with Trey McBride still being a top 2 tight end, except for the if Kyler Murray's gone. That is
Mm.
DEFCON 0. I'm gonna make it even worse. I don't know. Um,
The world has
yeah,
ended.
yeah, I think best case scenarios might actually be if they just go and they draft a lineman at 4, like Joe Alt or
Yeah.
someone, like just
Mhm.
help Kyler Murray a little bit more. So I want to ask this: we love Trey McBride. We think he's either tight end 1 or tight end 2 for dynasty. Is there any instance in which you'd actually trade Trey McBride away?
Maybe for like team need, like maybe if I'm sitting on a team where I've got like, Trey McBride and David Njoku or something like that, or Trey
Right.
McBride and Dalton Kincaid, and I've got an
Maybe it's like
extra tight end.
superflex and you need a quarterback or something.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's kind of like the only situation. It's tough. You always want to hear about like trading down within tiers and adding a package where you say like, yeah, I'd want to trade Trey McBride for another tight end and get a second round pick in return or something like that. But I think the only guy that's in the same tier is Sam Laporta, and nobody's giving you extra on top of Sam Laporta. Like, yeah, sure, yeah, if you can go
Yeah.
Trey McBride for Laporta in a second, do it. But I don't think anybody's giving you that offer. So I think, yeah, it's very, very rare that you want to trade away one of the best young players at the position.
So there you have it. Those are our players that are skyrocketing. Fun word to say. Skyrocketing up the dynasty ranks. It's Trey McBride, tight end for Arizona, Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver for San Francisco, Jordan Love, quarterback for Green Bay, Rachaad White, running back for Tampa Bay, Nico Collins, wide receiver for Houston, and Rashee Rice, wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. Dave and I, we are going to be back here every Monday. We're going to be bringing you the show once a week. We're still going to be on YouTube and on all of your podcast feeds. So you're going to continue to see us. We're going to be opening up a little bit more, doing a little bit more, talking about rookies, talking about dynasty. We'll get into the free agency stuff. I'm sure we're going to have some coach signings happen really soon. And we'll talk about the effect of those on the teams and where they end up. But
Shane
yeah, stick
Waldron
with
to
us.
Chicago. Love that one.
That's
Sorry,
actually a pretty
I had
good
to plug
one.
it. Really good one.
That's,
I'm happy
he's
about that.
gonna
That was like the
he's gonna
number
be
one guy I
great.
wanted for the OC. Yeah.
He's going to be great for Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
Did I? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Uh,
I like that you've accepted it.
we haven't done the show in the last week and a half or so. I briefly mentioned it, but I did a deep study on first round draft picks, and I've converted. I love Justin Fields, but I think that it is time to move on and draft Caleb Williams. I said it.
Justin Fields to Atlanta. Justin Fields to Atlanta. Is it happening?
It would be fun. It would be a lot of fun.
Let's will it into existence. There's no more Arthur Smith. That would be like the ultimate, just like sexy team. That's what that would be. I would love it. All right. So, like I said, we're gonna be back again next week. I want to just give a big thank you to everyone that has supported this show. We've been nominated for best audio and best video at the FSGA. That's the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association. So it's just really cool to be nominated for an award. We're nominated up there with Fantasy Alarm and the Fantasy Footballers for a mid-size enterprises or mid-size fantasy football companies, whatever we want to call it. It's just so awesome to have the support of all of our viewers,
Yeah.
our listeners, everyone around us. Just a big thank you to everyone here at Football Guys, to Joe Bryant, to the production team, Dave, to you, of course, and our families, wives, and everyone that supports us. It's so awesome. So just want to give a big thank you to all of you guys. All right, we'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening all the way through. We'll see you next time. Adios.